Your promotion isn't approved. Preston Vale said it at 11:20 a.m. inside the glass office on the 22nd floor, and I remember the exact minute because the digital clock behind his shoulder flipped from 11:19 to 11:20 the second the sentence left his mouth. Fourth year in a row. Same office, same tone, same carefully rehearsed corporate softness executives practice in front of bathroom mirrors before they walk into meetings like this one. I nodded once. I didn't say a word. I sat in that ergonomic chair with the too firm lumbar support and watched him arrange his hands on the desk the way people arrange props before a photograph. My name is David Mercer. I'm 50 years old. Senior Client Strategy Lead at Meridian Brand Partners, an agency most people outside our industry have never heard of, which usually meant our clients were happy and our billing was quiet. 18 years I gave that company. 18 years of red-eye flights, canceled anniversaries, hotel rooms in cities I couldn't remember by morning, and pitch decks I rewrote at 3 a.m. because a director wanted the deliverables softer, punchier, more premium, more disruptive, more whatever the last investor call had rewarded. 18 years building accounts that became the entire face of the agency. And every February I sat in Preston Vale's office and listened to a new version of the same speech. The first year it was timing. We're restructuring the partner track, David, next cycle without question. The second year it was optics. The board wants younger voices in the room and we need to balance the narrative. The third year it was strategy. We're going in a more brand-forward direction and your work skews too operational. 18 years of walking into rooms with panicked CEOs and stabilizing their entire brand identity while their marketing teams cried in the hallway. And Preston called that operational the way people call a heart surgeon a technician. This year, the fourth year, he didn't even bother inventing a reason. He just said the promotion wasn't approved, waited a beat for me to argue, and when I didn't, his shoulders eased in this small, involuntary way that told me everything. He had expected a fight. He had prepared for one. He probably had HR on standby in case I raised my voice or asked questions that would show up in a formal complaint later. Instead, I sat there quietly, and that silence unsettled him more than any argument I could have made. He filled the quiet with executive noise. Adaptability matters at your level, David. That phrase again. The one they use when they mean too experienced, too expensive, too likely to remember what the company used to stand for. He mentioned that Jordan Kessler had been given the senior partner title. Jordan, 32 years old, MBA from a school that mattered, 4 years at the agency. Most of those 4 years shadowing me on accounts I had built before he graduated college. Jordan gave good deck. Jordan smiled during difficult client calls the way politicians smile during hurricane footage. Jordan had never handled a single account crisis without me on speaker in the background feeding him the actual answer. I stood up. I said thank you, which even now I don't know why I said. Preston shook my hand across the desk and told me he appreciated my flexibility. Flexibility. That was the word he used. I walked out through the open-plan floor where junior strategists pretended not to look up from their monitors, and I passed the conference room where 6 years ago I had personally landed Northline Financial, our largest retainer, on a Saturday afternoon while the founder was recovering from surgery in a hospital room in Cleveland. By the time I reached my desk, I had already decided. I just hadn't said it out loud yet. I sat down at my desk without opening my laptop. That was the first thing I noticed about myself. 18 years of muscle memory told me to log in immediately, check the inbox, triage the fires, but that morning my hands stayed flat on the desk like they belonged to somebody else. The office noise moved around me the way traffic moves around a stopped car. Phones, keyboards, the espresso machine hissing behind the pantry wall. I could hear all of it clearly for the first time in years. When you stop performing, the world gets loud. My phone buzzed. A calendar reminder. 12:00 p.m. lunch with Harold Ashwin from Northline Financial. I had forgotten about it entirely, which never happened. Harold and I had a standing lunch on the third Wednesday of every month at a quiet Italian place 2 blocks from his office. Not a business lunch, not officially. 6 years ago, when I first landed his account, we spent our first meeting in a hospital cafeteria because he refused to reschedule after his knee surgery. We ate terrible coffee cake and talked about his daughter's college applications for 90 minutes before he ever asked what I did for a living. When I finally explained brand strategy, he laughed and said, "So you're the guy who tells companies who they are?" I told him no. I was the guy who reminded them who they were before consultants confused them. He signed with me the next morning. Harold didn't care about Meridian brand partners. He cared about me. That was the part Preston Vale had never understood, because Preston had never actually sat across a table from a client whose business kept his family fed. Preston understood accounts as line items on quarterly summaries. Harold understood accounts as handshakes. I stood up from my desk, put on my jacket, and walked out of the office without telling anyone where I was going. Nobody stopped me. Nobody noticed. That was the other thing about being a senior anything at Meridian. Nobody tracked your calendar because your calendar was the thing tracking everyone else. At the restaurant, Harold was already seated by the window. He waved when he saw me. Same navy blazer, same silver watch his father had given him in 1987, same easy smile that always made me forget I was technically working. We ordered the same thing we always ordered. He asked about my daughter. I asked about his grandson. Halfway through the meal, he set his fork down and studied me for a moment. "You're quiet today, David." I hadn't planned to tell him, I really hadn't, but something about the way Harold asked, without pressure, without curiosity, just genuine attention, made me answer honestly. I told him about the meeting. Not dramatically, not bitterly, just the facts. 4th year in a row, Preston Vale, Jordan Kessler getting the title. Harold listened without interrupting, which is a skill most executives lost sometime in the 90s. When I finished, he wiped his mouth with the napkin, folded it carefully, and said one sentence. "David, if you leave, I leave with you." I didn't respond immediately. I don't think he expected me to. He just returned to his pasta like he had commented on the weather. But that sentence sat between us the rest of the meal, quiet and heavy, and by the time the check arrived, I felt something shift inside my chest that hadn't shifted in years. Not excitement, not fear, something steadier than both. Recognition. I walked back to the office through downtown foot traffic and started thinking, really thinking, about what I had actually built over 18 years. Not the deck templates, not the internal processes, the relationships. Harold. Diane Voss at Kettering Textiles, the Rustin brothers at Ardent Hospitality, 6 or 7 others who had signed retainers because I sat across from them during moments that mattered. Meridian's logo had never once entered those rooms. That afternoon, I made a phone call I had been avoiding for 3 years. The phone call was to a man named Curtis Halloran. Curtis had been a senior partner at Meridian back when the agency still had a soul, before the private equity acquisition in 2019 turned every meeting into a metrics review and every promotion decision into a spreadsheet. He left in 2021, and for the first 6 months, everyone at the office pretended he had been asked to leave. He hadn't. He walked out on his own terms and started a boutique agency called Halloran Strategy Group, with 3 other former partners from different firms. Their client roster stayed small on purpose. Fewer accounts, higher margins, no investors breathing down their necks. Curtis had reached out to me 3 times over the past 3 years. Coffee, casual, no pressure. Each time I told him I was flattered but committed. Each time he smiled that patient smile of a man who understood something about corporate loyalty that I hadn't figured out yet. Before he left the last coffee, he said, "David, the door doesn't close. It just gets quieter." I remembered that sentence walking back to my office that afternoon. I called him from my car at 2:17 p.m. He picked up on the second ring like he had been waiting. "David, Curtis, is the door still open?" There was a pause on his end, but not a hesitation. More like a man setting down a coffee cup before he answers something serious. "It never closed. When do you want to talk?" We met that same evening. His office was on the 8th floor of a converted warehouse building on the west side of town. Exposed brick, low lighting. None of the corporate glass theater Preston Vale had built his career around. Curtis was already in the conference room when I arrived, along with two of his partners, Renata Sokolova and Miguel Berenger. Renata had run brand strategy at 3 different agencies over 22 years and had a reputation for eating executive titles for breakfast. Miguel had built the technology practice at a firm twice Meridian's size before deciding he wanted to work with people whose names he actually knew. They didn't waste time. They asked me one question. What would you need to make this work? Not what would you accept, not what were you making before. What would you need? That framing alone told me more about their firm than any pitch deck could have. I answered honestly. Equity stake, not just salary. Client autonomy. A partner title that meant something instead of a decorative one that meant nothing. And time, real time, to bring over the relationships that would come with me, done properly, done ethically, no scorched earth, no burned bridges. Curtis nodded through all of it. When I finished, he slid a folder across the table. We drafted this after your call this afternoon. Review it tonight. If you want changes, we'll make them. If you want to sign it, we'll countersign tomorrow. I opened the folder in my car in the parking garage before driving home. The offer was better than I expected. Not extravagantly better, but structurally better in every way that mattered. The equity stake was real. The title was managing partner, client strategy. There was a client transition clause that acknowledged relationship-based departures were legally different from account theft, and their legal team had already flagged the specific protections I would need. Someone had done their homework, and they had done it hours after a single phone call. I sat in that concrete garage for almost 40 minutes reading it twice. When I got home that night, my wife Ellen was in the kitchen finishing dinner. I hadn't told her about the promotion meeting yet. I hadn't told her about lunch with Harold. I hadn't told her about Curtis. I sat down at the counter and she looked at me the way she had looked at me for 24 years, and she said quietly, "Something changed today." I said yes. Then I told her everything. Ellen didn't react the way most spouses react to news like that. She didn't get excited. She didn't get scared. She didn't ask 100 logistical questions about health insurance and severance timelines. She just listened. Ellen was a labor and delivery nurse for 27 years before she retired early 2 summers ago, and she had a particular kind of patience that came from watching thousands of people go through the most important moments of their lives. When I finished talking, she stood up from the counter, walked around to my side, and put both hands on my shoulders. "David," she said, "I've been waiting for you to have this conversation for 4 years." That knocked the breath out of me for a second, not because it was harsh, but because it was true, and because she had held that truth quietly for 4 years without ever pushing me toward it. She had watched me come home every February with the same tired eyes and the same rehearsed acceptance. She had watched me tell myself that next year would be different. She had watched me shrink slowly into a version of myself that didn't quite match the man she married. And she had let me arrive at the conclusion on my own, because she understood something I was only beginning to understand. You cannot rescue a person from a decision they haven't made yet. We stayed up until almost 1 in the morning at the kitchen table with the offer letter between us. Ellen went through it line by line, asking practical questions, flagging clauses she wanted me to have a lawyer review, circling things in blue pen the way she used to circle abnormal readings on patient charts. By the time we went to bed, I had a plan for the next 72 hours. Sign nothing yet. Consult with an employment attorney in the morning. Draft a resignation letter that was clean, professional, and impossible to weaponize against me later. And most importantly, do not touch a single client account until the ink was dry and the ethical boundaries were clearly established. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was anxious, but because my mind had switched from survival mode to planning mode for the first time in years, and it was moving too fast to shut down. Around 3 a.m., I got up quietly, made a cup of tea, and sat in my home office with a legal pad. I wrote 3 columns. Column 1, clients whose relationships were personal and would likely follow. Column 2, clients who were relationship adjacent but company loyal. Column 3, clients who belonged entirely to Meridian and would stay regardless. That third column was important. That was the ethical firewall. I would not touch column 3 under any circumstance. Not because Meridian deserved that grace, but because I deserved to leave with my name intact. Column 1 had 11 names on it. I stared at that number for a long time. The next morning, Thursday, I went to work like nothing had happened. That was the strangest part. 18 years of habit does not evaporate overnight, and there was something almost surreal about walking into that same lobby, past the same security guard named Terrence who had worked there almost as long as I had, and greeting the same receptionist who always had 2 Diet Cokes on her desk. By 9 a.m. Terrence nodded at me the way he always did. I nodded back. Neither of us knew this would be one of my last mornings walking through that door. I spent most of Thursday in back-to-back client calls. Nothing unusual. I handled a routing issue for Diane Voss at Kettering Textiles, walked the Rustin brothers through a quarterly brand audit for Ardent Hospitality, and sat in on a strategy call with a mid-sized account named Blackmore Pharmaceuticals, where Jordan Kessler was supposed to be leading. Jordan spent most of the call reading directly from the deck. When the client asked a follow-up question that wasn't in the slides, he froze. I stepped in without hesitation. Old habits. The Blackmore call ran 40 minutes over. When it finally ended, Jordan Kessler stayed on the line after the client dropped off, and I could hear him breathing on the other end of the connection before he spoke. "Thanks for the assist, David." That question came out of nowhere. It hadn't come out of nowhere. It was the most obvious follow-up in the entire deck, and any strategist who had actually read the client's last quarterly earnings report would have seen it coming from 3 slides away. I didn't say that. I just said no problem, standard stuff, and ended the call. I sat at my desk afterward and did something I hadn't done in years. I opened a spreadsheet and started tracking, hour by hour, the number of times I bailaid out someone else's account that week. Not in a bitter way, just in a factual way, because facts were about to matter more than feelings. By the end of Thursday, I had documented 11 interventions across 7 accounts that were technically not mine. Some were quick. A 3-minute call to unstick a proposal. A forwarded email with a template I had written years ago. Others were significant. A 90-minute rescue of a pitch that would have collapsed without me on the line. All of them had been invisible to Preston Vale, because Preston measured contribution by titles on org charts, not fingerprints on outcomes. That night I met with the employment attorney Ellen had researched. Her name was Priyanka Desmukh, and she came recommended by 2 people whose judgment I trusted more than my own. Her office was small, quiet, and lined with law books that actually looked red. She listened to my situation for the first 20 minutes without taking a single note, which unnerved me until I realized she was watching me instead of the words. When I finished, she asked 3 questions in a row. "Do you have a non-compete in your Meridian contract?" I said yes, but a limited one, geographic restrictions only. "Do you have a non-solicitation clause?" I said yes, 12 months. "Have you initiated contact with any current Meridian clients about your departure, however indirect?" I said no. Harold Ashwin had initiated the conversation himself, unprompted, before I had made any decision. I had not responded to his statement about leaving with me. I had not called any other client. I had not sent a single message hinting at my plans. She nodded slowly. "Then you're in a stronger position than most people who walk into this office. But we need to be surgical about the next 7 days." She walked me through the framework. I would resign cleanly, with a professional letter that gave standard notice and made no reference to grievances. I would not contact clients during the notice period beyond normal business obligations. After my final day at Meridian, the non-solicitation clock would begin, but the clause had a specific carve-out for clients who initiated contact with me first. That was the door. Harold had already opened it, and any client who reached out on their own after my departure would legally have the right to do so. Priyanka drafted the resignation letter that evening. 2 paragraphs. Clean, warm, professional. Not one word Preston Vale could twist into anything actionable. She also drafted a separate document, a personal statement I would keep in my records but not send, that documented every promotion denial, every performance review, every quantifiable contribution over 18 years. Insurance, she called it. Something to have in a drawer in case Meridian decided to get creative later. By Friday morning, I had 2 signed offers in front of me: the Halloran Strategy Group partnership and my resignation from Meridian. I signed both at 7:42 a.m. at my kitchen table with Ellen sitting across from me holding her coffee. She didn't say anything grand. She just reached across and squeezed my hand once. Then I drove to work for what I already knew would be the last real day of my old life. I walked into the lobby at 8:47. Terrence gave me the same nod. The receptionist had her 2 Diet Cokes. Everything looked identical to every other Friday for 18 years, which made the moment stranger than I expected. When something big is about to happen internally, you assume the world will reflect it somehow. It never does. That is the loneliest part of a decision like this. Nobody around you knows the ground has already moved. I went to my desk. I checked email. I answered 2 client questions. I ate a granola bar. And at 10:00 a.m., I walked up to the 22nd floor and asked Preston Vale's assistant, a young woman named Marisol Trent, if he had 15 minutes. She glanced at his calendar and said he was free until 10:45. I thanked her and stepped into his office. Preston looked surprised. He wasn't expecting me. He gestured toward the chair across from his desk with that half-distracted executive politeness, the same chair I had sat in less than 48 hours earlier while he told me my promotion wasn't approved. I sat down. I placed the envelope containing the resignation letter on his desk. I slid it across the walnut surface exactly the way he had slid the promotion decision across it 2 days before. He looked at the envelope. He looked at me. He didn't open it yet. "David, Preston, I'm resigning, standard notice period, 2 weeks, everything is in the letter." His face did something I had never seen it do before. It went through 3 expressions in about 4 seconds. Surprise, then calculation, then a careful attempt to reassemble itself into executive composure. He opened the envelope slowly. He read the 2 paragraphs Priyanka had drafted. He read them again. Then he set the letter down on his desk and folded his hands the way he always folded them when he was buying time. "David, this is unexpected. Let's talk about this. Is this about the promotion?" "No, Preston, it's not about the promotion." That was technically true. It was about 4 promotions, but I didn't say that. Priyanka's advice sat clearly in the back of my head. Give them nothing to work with. No grievances, no accusations, no ammunition. Preston leaned back in his chair. I could see his mind moving through the standard playbook. Retention offer, counter title, emergency partner track review. He tried the first one immediately. "Let me talk to the committee this afternoon. I think there's real appetite to revisit the director conversation." For years he had told me the committee had no appetite. Now, the moment I stopped asking, the appetite had returned. "I appreciate that, Preston. My decision is final." He shifted tactics. "Where are you going?" He asked it casually, but the casualness was performed. He was already trying to determine legal exposure. "I'll share that in due course. It won't create any conflict with my non-compete." His jaw tightened slightly. He asked about client transitions. I told him I would work with the transition team over the 2-week period to hand off every active account with complete documentation, exactly as required. I told him I would not initiate contact with any clients about my departure. I told him he could have Meridian's legal team review my exit process at any time. He nodded slowly. I could see him recognizing that whoever had prepared me well. "David, I hope you understand this puts us in a difficult position." "I do understand, Preston. It puts you in exactly the position you designed." That was the only sharp thing I said the entire meeting. It slipped out before I could stop it. But it was quiet, factual, and true, and Preston Vale didn't have a response for it because there wasn't one. He just watched me stand up, shake his hand across the desk, and walk out of the glass office at 10:19 a.m. for the last time as his employee. News inside a corporate office does not travel through email. It travels through hallway body language, elevator pauses, and the sudden appearance of people at your desk who normally have no reason to be there. By 11:15 a.m., 3 colleagues had stopped by my cubicle under transparent pretenses. A former teammate named Adrian Falk wandered over to ask about a shared drive folder that had been untouched for 2 years. A junior strategist named Willa Bankston needed to borrow a stapler she absolutely did not need. And Cornelius Vega from the finance operations team came by to confirm my extension number for what he called quarterly directory maintenance, which was not a real thing. I answered all of them politely. I gave them nothing. Priyanka's guidance echoed steadily in the background. Every conversation during the notice period is potential evidence. Say nothing about the future. Say nothing about grievances. Do your job. Around noon, Preston Vale sent a company-wide email announcing my departure with the standard language corporations use when they want to sound gracious without conceding anything. After 18 years of dedicated service, David Mercer has decided to pursue new opportunities outside the firm. We wish him the very best. The email included a farewell reception on my final Friday, 2 lines about my contributions. No mention of specific accounts, specific wins, specific years. A career sanded down to a paragraph. Within 30 minutes, my inbox began filling with messages from colleagues past and present. Some were warm, some were fishing. A few were genuinely surprised. One message stood out. It came from Renata Sokolova at Halloran Strategy Group, and it contained a single sentence. "The office is ready when you are." I closed my laptop and went for a walk around the block to clear my head. That afternoon, the first client email arrived. Not from Harold, from Diane Voss at Kettering Textiles. She had received the company-wide announcement forwarded to her by someone at Meridian, most likely Jordan Kessler, in a clumsy attempt to reassure clients about continuity. Her email to me was short. "David, please call me at your earliest convenience. Personal cell attached." I forwarded the email to Priyanka without responding. Priyanka replied within an hour. "Do not initiate. If she calls your personal number after your last day, you may answer. Until then, no contact." I did not respond to Diane's email. That was one of the hardest things I did that entire week. The next 2 weeks moved in slow motion and fast forward at the same time. During business hours, I documented everything. Every active account, every open initiative, every relationship history, every pending deliverable. I built handoff documents so thorough that even Jordan Kessler could not claim later that I had left him unprepared. Preston Vale's legal team reviewed my transition work twice and found nothing to flag. In the evenings, I met with Curtis, Renata, and Miguel at their offices, setting up my new workspace, meeting the small team I would be leading, and reviewing which clients Halloran already had so that I could ethically map any overlaps in advance. On the second Wednesday of my notice period, I received a text from Harold Ashwin. It said only, "3rd Wednesday next month. Same place. Different chair for you." I smiled at my phone for a long time. I did not respond. My last day at Meridian was a Friday. The farewell reception was held in the 11th floor conference room at 4:00 p.m. Sheet cake from the bakery across the street. Sparkling cider in plastic cups. About 40 people showed up, which was less than half of the people who had received the invitation. Preston Vale gave a 2-minute speech. He used the phrase "valued contributor" 3 times. He shook my hand for a photograph the marketing team took for internal newsletter purposes. At 5:37 p.m., I walked out of the lobby carrying one cardboard box. Terrence nodded goodbye. I nodded back. The 18 years ended exactly the way they had started, quietly. I gave myself one weekend. Just one. Ellen and I drove up to a small lake town about 2 hours north of the city. The kind of place where the coffee shop closes at 3 p.m. and nobody cares what you used to do for a living. We stayed at a bed and breakfast run by a retired couple who spent breakfast telling us about their grandchildren. My phone stayed in the room. Ellen and I walked around the lake twice on Saturday and did not talk about work once. On Sunday morning, over eggs and burnt toast, she looked at me and said, "You look like yourself again." I hadn't realized how far away from myself I had drifted until she said that. Monday morning, I walked into Halloran Strategy Group at 8:15 a.m. My office was on the 8th floor, corner unit, real windows that opened, exposed brick on 2 walls. There was a small ceramic dish on my desk with a handwritten note from Curtis. "Welcome home." That was all it said. I sat down at my new desk, opened my new laptop, and started my new job. Tuesday morning at 9:04 a.m., my personal cell phone rang. Harold Ashwin. I answered on the second ring. He didn't waste time. "David, I've held Northline's renewal conversation with Meridian for 3 weeks. I'm not signing it. I've given them formal notice that we're transitioning our account. Where are you now, and how do I move my business over?" I told him where I was. I told him the ethical process for a client-initiated transition. I told him he would need to send Meridian a formal termination letter first, wait for the contractual notice period to complete, and then engage with Halloran as a new client relationship. No shortcuts, no gray areas. Harold said he had already spoken to his in-house counsel, and everything was in motion. His paperwork terminating Meridian had been sent Monday afternoon. I hung up the phone and sat in my new chair for a full minute without moving. At 11:22 a.m. the same morning, Diane Voss from Kettering Textiles called. Same conversation, different words. She had heard through industry channels that I had left. She had been unhappy with Meridian's account handling for over a year, but had stayed because of my personal management of her file. She wanted to know if Halloran could take her on. I gave her the same ethical framework. She said her legal team was already drafting the notice. By Wednesday afternoon, the Rustin brothers at Ardent Hospitality had reached out through LinkedIn. By Thursday, a small industrial client named Prescott Machining had called. By Friday of my first week at Halloran, 6 clients from my Column 1 list had independently initiated contact. 6. I did not solicit a single one of them. I could not have if I had wanted to. Priyanka reviewed every incoming message before I responded. Every client transition was documented, time-stamped, legally clean. Halloran's own legal team, led by a woman named Deirdre Chan who had spent 12 years at a firm specializing in non-solicitation defense, coordinated directly with Priyanka on each file. Meanwhile, back at Meridian, things were quietly unraveling. I heard fragments through former colleagues. Preston Vale had called an emergency partners meeting the Monday after my last day. Jordan Kessler had been pulled off 2 accounts within 72 hours after client complaints. The Blackmore Pharmaceuticals contact had asked directly, on a call, why the person who actually knew their business was no longer on the account. Jordan reportedly had no answer. By the end of my second week at Halloran, Meridian's senior leadership had figured out what was happening, not through spies or leaks, but through the simplest signal in the industry: termination notices. When multiple flagship accounts send termination letters within 10 business days of each other, no explanation is required. Preston Vale called me on the Tuesday of my third week. I let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was 94 seconds long. I listened to it once in my office with the door closed. Preston's voice had a different texture than the one he used inside the glass office. Softer, less rehearsed, thinner around the edges. He said he understood I was busy. He said he wanted to have a brief professional conversation off the record about the current client situation. He said he was sure there had been some miscommunication and that a quick call between us could clear up a number of misunderstandings. He used the phrase professional courtesy twice. I forwarded the voicemail to Priyanka. She called me back within 20 minutes. Her instruction was simple: do not return the call. Any communication with Preston Vale from this point forward would go through legal channels. If Meridian wanted a conversation, their attorneys could contact Priyanka directly. I never spoke to Preston Vale again. Their attorneys did contact her. Twice. The first letter was a standard fishing expedition, requesting that I confirm in writing that I had not violated my non-solicitation agreement. Priyanka responded with a 2-page document, prepared with Deirdre Chan, that outlined every client transition to date, the exact date each client had initiated contact, the exact process by which each engagement had been transferred, and copies of every relevant piece of correspondence. Their letter was clean, factual, and airtight. Meridian's attorneys did not respond for 11 days. The second letter arrived 3 weeks later. It was softer in tone. It acknowledged that the client transitions had been executed within contractual boundaries. It suggested, without demanding, that a good faith gesture from my side might help preserve professional relationships across the industry. Priyanka read it out loud to me over the phone, and I could hear the small, dry laugh in her voice when she finished. David, this is the letter law firms send when they've realized they have no case and want to save face. We did not respond to that letter either. Meanwhile, at Halloran Strategy Group, I was doing something I had not done in almost a decade. I was building, not maintaining, not defending, not putting out fires other people had started. Building. Curtis had given me a real seat at the partners' table, which meant I sat in on strategic decisions that shaped the firm itself, not just individual accounts. Renata and I worked together on a rebrand for a mid-sized food distributor that had been drifting for 3 years, and we did it in 6 weeks with a team of 4 people. At Meridian, that project would have taken 6 months and involved 22 stakeholders. I noticed something during those first 3 months that I hadn't expected. I was less tired, not less busy. The workload at Halloran was, in raw hours, comparable to what I had carried at Meridian. But the tiredness was different. It was the tiredness of exertion, not the tiredness of erosion. I came home in the evenings and had energy left for Ellen, for our daughter's phone calls, for the small things I had let atrophy for years. Around the 4-month mark, Harold Ashwin invited Ellen and me to a dinner at his house. His wife Marguerite cooked. Their grandson was there. Harold pulled me aside after the meal, out on his back deck with a glass of something amber and expensive, and said, "David, do you know why I told you at lunch that day I would leave with you?" I said I had assumed it was loyalty. He shook his head. Loyalty was part of it, but mostly it was this. For 6 years, every time I had a problem, you picked up the phone, not Meridian. You. When my daughter's business was collapsing in 2022 and I called at 9 p.m. on a Sunday, you answered. That is not a company. That is a person. I nodded. I did not trust myself to say anything. Harold clapped my shoulder once and we went back inside. 18 months passed before I drove past the Meridian building again. It happened by accident. Ellen and I were meeting our daughter for dinner at a restaurant 3 blocks away, and the traffic pattern that evening routed me directly past the lobby I had walked through more than 4,000 times. I slowed down at the light and looked up at the 22nd floor. The glass office was still there. Someone else's silhouette was framed inside it now. I couldn't tell if it was Preston Vale or someone new. Ellen noticed me looking. She reached over and put her hand on my forearm without saying anything. The light turned green and I drove on. Meridian was still operating. It had lost 7 major accounts in the 8 months following my departure, 4 of them to Halloran and 3 to competing firms. Preston Vale had been quietly reassigned to a strategic advisory role within the parent private equity firm, which everyone in the industry understood as a soft landing before an eventual exit. Jordan Kessler had been let go after 11 months, and I heard later that he had resurfaced at a smaller agency in a different city, still giving good deck, still smiling during difficult calls. I felt no satisfaction about any of it. I felt distance. That was the surprising part. Not vindication, not vengeance, not even closure. Just distance, the kind you feel when you look at a house you used to live in and cannot quite remember which room was yours. At Halloran Strategy Group, my second year exceeded every projection Curtis had modeled when he first drafted my offer. The equity stake I had negotiated in that concrete parking garage turned out to be worth more than 4 years of my old Meridian salary combined. But the equity was not the part that mattered. The part that mattered was walking into the office on a Monday morning and knowing with complete clarity that the work I did that day would be attributed to me, credited to me, and remembered as mine. That sounds simple. It is not simple. Millions of people spend entire careers without ever having that experience. I hired 2 people during my second year. One was a strategist named Amya Odell, who had been passed over for a partner track at her previous firm for reasons that would sound familiar to anyone who has read this far. The other was a younger analyst named Devin Hartley, 28 years old, sharp, hungry, and most importantly, the son of a warehouse manager. He understood work the way people understand work when they have watched a parent do it for real. I promoted Amya to senior partner at the end of her first year. I did not make her wait 4 cycles. Harold Ashwin still calls me on the 3rd Wednesday of every month. Same restaurant, same table. His grandson is applying to colleges now. Diane Voss and I have expanded Kettering Textiles into 2 new product lines. The Rustin brothers sold Ardent Hospitality last spring for a figure that surprised even them, and they invited me to the closing dinner. I sat at a table with 4 founders and 3 attorneys, and Preston Vale's name was not mentioned once. Preston Vale in that room had never existed. I think about that meeting sometimes, the glass office. 11:20, Preston folding his hands on the walnut desk, 4th year in a row. I used to imagine what I should have said in that moment, some cutting sentence, some prepared speech. But the truth is that the best response was the one I gave. Silence, a nod, a walk to the door. Because everything after that meeting, the phone call to Curtis, the lunch with Harold, the offer letter in the parking garage, the resignation, the clients who followed, the life I have now, all of it grew out of that silence. The clients were always mine. I just had to walk far enough away from the building to see it clearly.